I think we are ready to start. Minister, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends and colleagues. Welcome to NATO's Building Integrity Discipline Conference 2015. We are particularly pleased to welcome the Norwegian Minister of Defense, Ine Eriksen Søreide, and so many representatives from the diplomatic corps here in Oslo. And of course, we are overwhelmed by the overall response to this conference. 31 different countries are represented among the participants. And then, of course, NATO's military authorities, ACT, SHAPE, Joint Force Command Brunsum, and Joint Force Command Naples. They are all well represented, in addition to the NATO headquarters in Brussels, of course. A warm welcome to you all. This conference, NATO Building Integrity Discipline Conference 2015, is a strong and unambiguous demonstration of BIs being firmly established as a discipline in NATO. A professional discipline, that is, with a comprehensive education and training program underway, and work started on the development of a NATO BI policy and a NATO BI doctrine. The eagle has not landed. The eagle is up and flying. And let me use this opportunity to congratulate the BI team in NATO's international staff, and Susan Pon in particular, with the results. I know it has been hard work, and it has paid off. The Center for Integrity in the Defense Sector, Cids, is what you may call a new kid on the block. We became operative only 2.5 years ago, and the center has expanded its work in several directions since then. Thanks to strong support from our mothership, the Norwegian Ministry of Defense, and a generous budget, including project support from the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. In addition to that, nothing can beat a competent, dedicated, and enthusiastic staff here in Oslo, as well as local and regional experts in our projects offices in Kiev, Podgorica, Pristina, and Sarajevo. It has been a privilege for me to work together with such wonderful people. In fact, this has made my job as a director much easier. Finally, as you may already have observed, Cids in 2015 has launched a number of new publications, and they are outside, including 2 handbooks that we hope will serve as additional tools for anti-corruption measures, education and training. Let me at this point simply mention that we managed in time for the conference to publish the 2 first booklets in our series called Guides for Good Governance. The first concerns human resource management and called Professionalism and Integrity in the Public Sector, and the second one, Tackling Conflicts of Interest in the Public Sector. And we have several additional issues in this series in the pipeline. Well, I guess that's more than enough of self-congratulation. Please excuse me. Let me now turn to the first speaker on our program, the Norwegian Minister of Defense, Ine Eriksen Søreide. In that connection, I could spend quite some time telling you a large number of very positive things. However, I think it's better for the minister herself to take the floor. The topic of her speech is Corruption as a Threat to Stability and Peace, a Norwegian view on the role of NATO. Minister, thank you for joining us here today. The floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to see so many participants and ambassadors awake at this time of the morning. You're always awake this time of the morning, of course. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and friends, it's a pleasure and a great honor for Norway to host NATO's Building Integrity Discipline Conference in 2015. I was at this podium also last year for the conference, and I think it's an important initiative, and I'm therefore very glad to see so many of you here. The focus, as some of you remember, for last year's conference was institution building. And I'm proud to say that as a result of that conference, NATO today has obtained a new tool, a handbook on how to design and implement integrity action plan. The handbook was written by the Center of Integrity in the Defense Sector in close cooperation with Transparency International UK and their Defense and Security Program. It's like this, and I suppose you can get it out there. I've just been told that it has also now been translated into French. Good. So now there's no excuse for anyone not to read this one. And I would like to recognize the cooperation between between the Center and also the security program of Transparency International. Catherine Dixon is here with us today, which I think is a very good sign to that. And tools are more or less what a program like Building Integrity needs. Tools which can guide and boost reform efforts. Tools which can help us fight corruption, and therefore I'm glad to say that a second handbook that will be launched today is here at the conference. And let me also acknowledge the close cooperation between CIDS and DIFI. In Norwegian, it's the Norwegian Agency for Public Management and E-Government. And this second handbook is an example of how cooperation and synergy between two different institutions may provide excellent results. This is the one for today, and it's called Criteria for Good Governance in the Defense Sector, International Standards and Principles. I do not know yet if it's going to be translated into French, but maybe. No doubt this has been a very productive year, and it's also been a challenging year when speaking of the new security environment in Europe. In today's international setting, we are once again forced to think of how we best can protect our common values, our democratic and free societies. And here, of course, credible collective defense remains at the core, together with the principle of cooperative security. But there is more to it. We need to protect, promote, and adhere to values, standards, and principles on which the international system is built. During the past year, we have witnessed that violation of these principles seriously undermines our security. Therefore, we all, as a collective in NATO, urge Russia to adhere to the established rules for how all countries should live together in peace and mutual respect. And history has taught us over time what to expect from an international system that disregards international law or uses military power to advance one's own interests and also dominated by the strong over the smaller, weaker neighbors. And we do not want to return to that. Also, combating corruption and promoting integrity and high ethical standards is, in short, fighting for good governance. And those are vital means to protect our common values. Cooperative security and collective defense are about much more than protection of political sovereignty and territorial integrity. It's about protecting our way of life. It's about peoples deciding their own future through democratic elections, the rule of law, and respect for civil and political liberties. It's about governments that are responsible to their people, governments that are transparent, responsive, and accountable. It's about respect for differences, tolerance of pluralism, but also about the need to cooperate on all that unites us. And we do stand united in a common cause to protect our values and principle of good governance. That is what building integrity and fighting corruption is all about. And that brings me to another key message. Corruption creates instability, undermines economic development, and threatens peace and security. And of course that raises the question, what is the role of NATO? Obviously, the alliance do not have a direct role to play when people of a country take to the streets to demonstrate their anger or lack of trust in elected politicians. On the other hand, such popular revolts or uprising may create conditions or situations that are conducive to instabilities that have international repercussions. It is therefore in the interest of all countries to cooperate on measures that will counteract instability by preventive means. This brings to the forefront our institutional capacity to cooperate through joining good forces. In Europe today, NATO and the EU are key institutional pillars in that effort. Based on the notion of cooperative security, both organizations reach out to partners and neighbors who share the political perspectives and ambitions. NATO has developed a network of partnerships to promote values that unite us. So has the European Union. And as umbrellas providing institutional frameworks on a larger scale, we have the Council of Europe and also the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE. And not to forget, on the global scale, we also have the United Nations. The challenge is to have all these institutional frameworks pull in the same direction, concerted and in accordance with their respective competencies and roles. Let me now turn to NATO's role more specifically. NATO has actively contributed to and has itself been a part of the transformation of Europe and international security after the end of the Cold War. For a while, it seemed like the vision of a peaceful, stable, and cooperative international community based on accept for democratic principles, the rule of law, and self-determination was within reach. Some observers even spoke enthusiastically about the end of history. That is not what happened. Instead, an important part of what we experienced was a return of history. Once Marxist-Leninism collapsed as the ideological superstructure in many countries, the vacuum in some places was filled by brands of illiberal nationalism. Rather than looking at close international cooperation as an opportunity in order to pursue common goals, neighbors and the external world more generally were by some considered as threats. The return to bad habits of history in some parts of the world fed political tensions, created new instabilities and antagonism. The wars in former Yugoslavia became a wake-up call for all of us. The response of the international community has been attempts to build on what unites us, to forge the conditions for peaceful resolution of conflicts, and focus on cooperative security. And in this, NATO has had, and still has, an important role to play. New democracies aimed for Euro-Atlantic integration and became members of both NATO and the EU. Some of us are still not members of the EU, by the way, but that's a different story. I will not bring up that here. And the development, we could only dream of this development 30 years ago. But have we succeeded in creating the foundations of a new and better world order? Well, in some areas, yes. In some areas, no. There are success stories as well as regrettable setbacks. In Europe, the successes far outweigh the issues that still remains to be solved. We have to remember that. On Europe's peripheries, North Africa, the Middle East, the Caucasus, the picture is mixed at best. And the hopes in connection with the Arab Spring have withered, although we do not know whether the seeds that have been sown at some point might grow in the longer term. The main setback, however, is coming from Russia. Its will to apply armed force to achieve political goals, its use of intimidation and pressure to change internationally recognized borders represents both a wake-up call and a major setback for European security. As I already mentioned, Russia's threats and actions have put credible collective defense back on the agenda. But in addition to a renewed focus on hard security, we should not reduce our attention assigned to soft security. We must reinforce our emphasis on cooperative security. Again, the overall objective is very clear: to protect the values that unite us. NATO's Building Integrity program promotes some crucial elements that are integral parts of those values. While anti-corruption measures by some may be perceived as aiming at investigation, prosecution, court procedures, including jail sentences, building integrity implies a focus on preventive measures. Building integrity aims at countering and reducing the risk of corruption and other kinds of fraud and unethical behavior. The message is a positive and constructive one. Prevention is key, and the objective is ensuring a political system based on good governance and high ethical standards. For most of us present here at this conference, particular responsibility rests with our ministries of defense, our armed forces and our defense sectors at large. Corruption and unethical behavior in the defense sector, as well as in public sector in general, are not limited to NATO's partner, new democracies or states in transition. On the contrary, the endemic nature of corruption makes no regard whether you are a member or not. Admitting rather than ignoring the risk of corruption is therefore crucial. No one can claim to be immune to the risk of corruption. We can all improve. Historically, we have experienced in the Norwegian defense sector as well, at some points raising public doubt about the integrity of our defense institutions. High and sustained attention is key to avoid this. Among other things, we have in place a comprehensive action plan with a focus on attitude, ethics, and leadership. Today, all employees, and especially leaders, go through compulsory learning programs. We do this to increase awareness, to promote discussions of moral dilemmas, and to stress the core values that we want to hold high and live by. We have ethical guidelines for contact with business and industry, as well as ethical guidelines for suppliers that want to do business with Norwegian defense. Let me also mention that we some time ago established an ethical advisory group. The group is an independent body that will review and provide input to the ethical issues involving the defense sector. As such, the group's mandate is not limited to corruption or, for that matter, other issues. This is why I think that all allies ought to participate actively in NATO's BI program. I'm very glad to see so many of you here, 31 countries represented as far as I know, 21 ambassadors. We have representatives from ACT, from SHAPE, from the Joint Forces Command in Brunsum and Naples. We have from NATO HQ. You're a great crowd, actually. But we have room for even more allies in these conferences. That corruption represents a common challenge is compounded by the European Commission's report on corruption in the EU's 28 member states last year. Let me also point out that Transparency International had this corruption perception index that shows that a clear majority, actually, of Europeans think that corruption is widespread in their own country. The conclusion is simple. We must counter this together. Corruption erodes public trust in institutions and in democracy. Where widespread mistrust prevails, it seriously may challenge the stability of a nation. The defense sector is a large spender of public money. European allies annually spend almost 190 billion euros on defense and security. This presents us with a great responsibility. We need to ensure accountability and transparent budgeting. We know that corruption affects the effectiveness of our armed forces. This is one of the sad lessons learned by Ukraine during the past year. As we've seen in Afghanistan, it doesn't help to succeed in reaching military operational objectives if we fail to establish good governance and accountability. Worst case, we may involuntarily feed systemic corruption and thus undermine our overall political objectives behind the mission. One obvious lesson is that both NATO and partner countries need to have a better understanding of the nature of corruption, its manifestations and effects, and how to avoid it when planning an operation. For this, both a policy and a doctrine is crucial. NATO has started work on both fronts. Norway has already included attention to the risks of corruption as part of our joint operational military doctrine. Therefore, I very much welcome the active support and involvement by NATO's military authorities in the BI program. In particular, welcome, as I mentioned, to the representatives of the NATO military command structure. We need your competencies and advice to formulate good education and training programs. I've already stated that the BI program needs the active involvement by all allies. But what about NATO as an institution? and the various elements that make up this organization. To set a good example sends a very powerful message. To live according to what you preach gives credibility. The message, do as I say, not as I do, is never convincing. In my view, NATO should require every major unit in its organization to develop comprehensive integrity plans. This is what large international corporations do. They do it to gain credibility. They do it to become better. They do it to be seen as responsible and trustworthy business partners. In short, they promote corporate responsibility at the same time as they promote the interests of their shareholders and other stakeholders. And this is what NATO should do too. And the alliance has slowly started working along that path. In 2013, the North Atlantic Council agreed on a NATO Code of Conduct. It is based on 5 core values and the principles that exemplify them: integrity, impartiality, loyalty, accountability, and professionalism. A comprehensive integrity plan may set up in a very systematic way how the organization intends to implement those values and put them into practice. Another good start is the fact that NATO, during its agency reform process, has introduced basic principles of good governance into the statutes of the new agencies. I'm extremely pleased to see these principles stated in the agency's statutes. Next step, in my view, should be for them to develop integrity plans or strategies. Ladies and gentlemen, trust between people is, as we all know, an essential social capital. Trust between countries and within an organization. Trust is true in all walks of life. And we do need to recognize this as an alliance. There is a need to make defense institutions more conscious of the risks that corruption poses to the defense sector itself and to its public legitimacy. Public trust needs to be deserved, and we need to be conscious of what corruption entails for international peace and stability. I think that this sets the appropriate context for the NATO Building Integrity program and for this conference. It invites us to foster greater awareness of some basic truths and values. A chain, as you all know, is only as strong as its weakest link. To perform effectively, the alliance must have 28 member states with reliable and well-functioning state institutions. It requires hard work from everyone. No one can claim to be immune to the risk of corruption. We can all improve, we can all do better. The Building Integrity program highlights the very core of NATO. Fundamental values as they were put forward by the Washington Treaty in 1949. Liberal democracy, rule of law, and individual freedom. It reinforces the need for an impartial and professionally independent civil service. It underpins the principle of good governance as reflected in a number of international treaties and conventions that the vast majority of the countries have signed. It addresses the issue of NATO's credibility and legitimacy. It supports our efforts in safeguarding our common values at the international level through joint action and other mechanisms that foster cooperative security. Good governance, high integrity in the public sector are not in themselves linked to NATO. Whether a country is already a member of the alliance, whether it would like to become a member, or whether it simply prefers to cooperate with NATO, is not the issue. The point is that good governance and high integrity in the public sector are values that we share, challenges we should address together. And in these efforts, NATO should be in the forefront. I wish you all a very successful conference, and I thank you for your attention, and I'm also happy to take a few questions if you have some.